Hello and welcome to yet another anime slash movie slash TV show review channel, where the host yells into the void of the internet and pretends to know what they're talking about. So being that I'm a pretty big Gundam fan, for this inaugural entry to the channel I have chosen Gundam GQuuuuuX, the beginning. Okay, I know the people in the movie call it GQuuuuuX, and the kana for it similarly says GQuuuuuX. So I'll try to stick to that pronunciation, but don't blame me if I lose track of that and I get too lazy to go back and re-record anything. Hey, at least you know I'll never call it G-cock. So obviously people who know anything about this movie already know that it's not actually a movie. It's just several episodes of an upcoming TV show being cut into one. Now, I consider the basic premise of this movie to be kind of a spoiler in and of itself, because even though you'll get instantly spoiled about it if you go on a simple Google search or a wiki, the initial trailers and teasers for this show had no indication of the, hidden premise, I'll call it. So if you somehow have not been spoiled on that yet, and you stumbled onto this video, I'll just go ahead and give a very short non-spoiler review of the movie before I get into any spoilerific thoughts. So, overall I found the movie quite entertaining, but also very jarring, because there's a sudden tonal shift in the middle of the movie that causes it to feel more like a double feature rather than one long introduction to a TV show. Despite spending a great deal of time to settle the viewer into the universe, this is possibly the most newcomer-unfriendly Gundam show I've ever seen. Still, I think in a way you can argue this left enough mystery that you would be enticed to watch the show when it starts airing next month. As a movie, I think it's a pretty uneven ride, and I find it really hard to give it some kind of rating, given that it's essentially an extended pilot for a TV show. But if I had to give it some kind of numerical rating, I guess I'd give it like a 6 out of 10 or something. Okay, that's it for simple impressions. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into spoilerific thoughts. Final warning, 3, 2, 1... Okay, so I alluded to this just a second ago, but I was really surprised just how much of the first episode of the original Mobile Suit Gundam they straight up remade in this movie. This was very much a fan service overload kind of situation, so they took things like the iconic shots like the Zaku belly stab or the Char Zaku kick being reproduced, except this time it's Char doing it in the Gundam instead. Hooray! Now, I'm someone that usually finds excessive fan service like this to be pretty obnoxious, so even though it tickled the Gundam fan in me, there was this other half of me that just wanted the movie to be a good movie and move along. Honestly, if they felt like being efficient, they could probably keep this prelude to about 5 minutes of screen time and they would have been able to explain just about everything. Instead, they had almost half the runtime of this movie taking place during this alternate one-year war, and a lot of it just felt like they were fangasming over how much they like Gundam, which is... I don't know, I get it to a degree, and a lot of it legitimately needs to be there to set up the story, but a lot of it just feels excessive. Of course, it's not all bad, because there's a renewed focus on characters who were woefully underused in the original Mobile Suit Gundam, particularly the character Shalia Bol. And it looks like that guy's gonna be a regular on the show as well. It's pretty funny to see characters like him getting more modernized pretty boy designs, but hey, everybody has to be sexy in modern anime and I can respect that. Anyway, there was also several things that happened during this prelude that I'm not sure if they were there for fanservice purposes or they were actually setting them up for some kind of purpose. Most notably during the prelude, or towards the tail end of it, Char runs into Sayla, or I guess she's just Artesia in this version as far as we know. We don't know if she kept the same alias, because we actually only see her through a new type flash during a very short MS battle. Now I have to imagine that this means Sayla is still running around in this alternate UC setting even after they jump forward in time. So she might play a part later in the show, because otherwise there's no reason that they would introduce her like that. Interesting side note about that scene is that I actually thought Char was fighting Amuro at first, but I'm sure that was completely intentional on the part of the writers, so I guess thumbs up to them for catching me by surprise there. So like I said, around the halfway point of the movie, they wrap up the prelude story, and here what happens is that Char reacts with the Saikamu inside the Red Gundam in some way, and it causes this big explosion called the Zek Nova. Essentially, it's this continuity's version of the Axis shock, except obviously it happens way earlier here. And it doesn't cause any kind of existential change in humanity or something like that. All it does is prevent, I think it was Solomon, from crashing into a lunar city, Granada. So in this version, it almost kills Caecilia, and she actually survives because of this. So that means in this continuity, Caecilia is actually still alive, and she is apparently still in command of the Zeon forces. It's not clear what happened to Giran, but the implication is that Dozol died at some point, I believe killed by Selah actually, and I think it's probably safe to assume that Garma died at some point as well, but they never explicitly state that, so who knows. So obviously, if you couldn't already figure out from the previous outline, the premise here is that instead of the Federation winning the one-year war, Zeon wins the one-year war, and they sign a peace treaty with the Federation that allows for their independence. Given that they don't go into the possibility of a subsequent genocide of Earthnoids after this, I have to assume that Giran is dead. This is also another clue that he is. But anyway, it's at this point the movie transitions to 5 years later in UC-85, which is kind of interesting because this is around the same era as Zeta Gundam in the original timeline. And here we meet the real lead of the story, which is Amate. She's just a typical high school student who is coming home from cram school, and she runs into a local black market courier named Nyan. Through a series of unfortunate events, she kind of attaches herself to Nyan because she wants to get paid back for her phone, and she gets introduced to this ragtag group of delinquents who are illegally building a mobile suit to take place in underground fights called clan battles. So meanwhile, a nearby Zeon ship under Shalia Bol is testing their titular Gundam GQuuuuuX, and they are also chasing after the mysterious red Gundam that had disappeared with Char years ago, but is apparently just flying around in space doing whatever. And through a series of hijinks, all too familiar to Gundam fans, Amate gains control of the GQuuuuuX and she begins to participate in clan battles, choosing the red Gundam as her partner, which is piloted not by Char, but a mysterious boy named Shuji, who Amate seems to have taken a quick shine to. It seems to imply that she has a quick crush on this boy. Now, with the obligatory summation out of the way, I guess I'll give some actual thoughts here. I feel like Amate's introduction here is a pretty huge cliche. Just a lot of shorthand being used to introduce her as kind of an everyday girl to the audience, which I don't even mind that much because it's really not that different than introductions we've been given to a lot of other Gundam protagonists because they have always been relatively grounded. However, I will say that Amate does come off as a lot more well-adjusted than your typical UC protagonist. The one thing is that we get to see her mother, or at least I'm assuming the character is her mother. It's actually never stated who that is she lives with. She comes off as a bit aloof, but otherwise Amate seems like a pretty normal girl. So that's probably the first gripe I have, which is that even though there's a lot of interesting hooks here in the premise, Amate herself seems like a bit of a nondescript and boring character, at least personality-wise. One of the things you could tell about Camille, for example, is that you can immediately tell he was a very disturbed and kind of neurotic, sort of delinquent character, and Amate doesn't really come off as that at all. She gets involved with the plot largely through happenstance. Although I'm probably not being completely fair, because I will say Amate does have a lot of proactive qualities to her, especially compared to where the last protagonist, Suletta, started off. In a lot of the beginning parts of The Witch from Mercury, Suletta was kind of led around by the nose and she just kind of did what other people told her to do. Here, a lot of what Amate does, she does because she decided to do those things on her own. So, for example, Amate is the one who kind of dogs Nyan so that she can get paid for her phone getting broken, and she's the one who actually decides to leap into action against the police, which starts the entire conflict off. And ultimately, she herself makes the decision to join in clan battles and invite Shuji along, even though one of the other characters kind of suggests that she did so. So on that note, I think that is something that is really interesting, the part where she kind of goes to war against the police. At one point, she kind of basically goes ACAB and goes to fight the police. The whole reason she gets into the first MS, the Azaku here, is because she sees the police on Side 6 abusing people who are basically living in the slums of Side 6. And the character Anki at this point notes that even though Zeon won the war, space noids are still not free. So I guess this is as good as any place to ask the obvious question related to all this is, why did they go with an alternate UC here? Because Well, I hope the show doesn't get too self-interested in just taking a trip down memory lane and referencing increasingly obscure things in Gundam lore, because that just wouldn't be very interesting. They have chosen to do this alternate UC things, and I guess what I want to know is what exactly is unique about an alternate UC that they think will be uniquely interesting. Especially compared to a lot of late UC settings where the Federation is already losing power and space nodes are getting a lot more autonomy. When you think about it, that isn't a dynamic that's too different than if Zeon just won the war. Maybe there's like some significant differences, but they didn't go with Giran Zeon winning the war. They went with seems like a softer Zeon that wouldn't commit like mass genocide right after they win or something. But I guess some people will argue that the first obvious answer to why they would choose an alternate UC is because, well, it lets them play with UC stuff without being tied down by continuity as much. But to me, I don't see that as being superior to just making a new continuity like they have been for many of the past series. So I think this is something where they have to try really hard to strike that balance between doing just enough of the UC stuff that it feels like there was actually a point to doing that without getting too deep into its lore. Because if you do that, then you kind of lose the audience and it kind of just feels like you're circle jerking a lot of fan service stuff. So I guess that's my overall thoughts, but I think the last thing I want to mention here is the clan battles themselves. The last thing I expected out of an alternate UC continuity is so many small winks to G Gundam, or at least it felt like winks to G Gundam, because aside from the basic concept feeling a little G Gundam-esque, there was also this aspect to it where it's like, okay, you have to remove the opponent's head to win, which is just like, okay, that's G Gundam. Although unfortunately Amate did not use Shining Fingers, so that is quite disappointing. One last note about the clan battles is that a lot of the initial marketing push for the show seemed to have a lot of emphasis on clan battles as if they were going to be a key part of the show. And I can't help but feel like, given how much they've set up here, it feels like it should be losing its relevance fairly early on, or at least it will lose relevance pretty quickly, given how expansive the story of UC tends to be. You have this huge playground in the UC, and I don't think it would be a good use of it if you just spent a significant amount of time just on some underground fighting ring. But we'll see how they work that in. Anyway, that's just some basic thoughts I've had on GQuuuuuX after I saw the movie. It starts airing in this April. Personally, I'm looking forward to the show, given both its premise and its staff pedigree. A lot of very interesting people who are famous in the anime industry are working on this show, including, of course, the legendary Hideaki Anno, who I guess is trying to complete his completed nerd cred card by doing not just this, but also he already did, Shin Godzilla, Shin Ultraman, and Shin Kamen Rider, so I guess doing a Gundam show was just obviously the next thing he was going to do. But yeah, that's all I gotta say. If you've made it all the way through this video somehow, thanks for watching. Feel free to comment below if you've seen the movie, or otherwise, if you have any thoughts or wishes and expectations for the show, please let me know. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. Until next time,